I want to show you my werebear build. I want to show you how you can get basically what I'm doing right now to work for you. Every critical strike we get is going to increase our critical damage while in this form by 10%, and this has an infinite stacking cap. You're going to feel like, hey, I'm not really slapping the way I want. But here's the thing. There's a lot of very strong werebear Paragon points, so your damage starts to ramp once you get past 50 and start getting those Paragon points. You need to understand Pulverize has a built-in shockwave mechanic from this legendary aspect that has a double hitbox. So it's a very large difference in terms of DPS output. It's a build that has some pitfalls, meaning if you don't know exactly how the build works, it might not work for you. But I'm going to do the best to also explain why it works. So that way, if there's something that maybe I'm missing, you can use your own education to fill in the gaps, etc. when it comes to the build. So the first thing most people are going to want to know when you're talking about a build is what are the skills? And then how are we going to modify them by the legendaries? The skills I'm going to use today primarily is Pulverize. This is a Pulverize-based werebear build. This is where we're going to be getting the majority of our damage, and when you're seeing things like the 300k crits we were doing, etc., that's going to be coming from Pulverize. For our basic attack, we're going to be using Maul. Our ultimate is Grizzly Rage, which is going to turn us into a dire werebear, and we're going to talk about why that's important in just a moment. Debilitating Roar, this is going to give us Fortify as well as Slow. We're going to need both of those in order to have the most damage possible. We're going to be using Hurricane because it applies slow as well as vulnerability, but it also is doable while we are in Grizzly Rage. So if you're looking here and I use Hurricane, then I go into Grizzly Rage mode, we still have the Hurricane and it can still critical strike, etc., which is important. Remember that. And then we're also going to use Earthen Bulwark, and the reason we're using Earthen Bulwark is because of Fortify, give us a barrier. Both of those things are quite important. It's also an Earth skill, which will synergize a little bit with this unique helmet. Now we're going to be going into the legendary aspects now. The first unique we're going to be using is a Vissela's Prayer. This is mostly used for the secondary stats. It has the damage while shapeshifted, the overpower damage, the maximum life. All of these things are quite important when it comes to this build and will actually help us increase our damage output. But we also get bonus werebear skills for Earth skills, and they'll fortify us. So effectively, if we have any other Earth skills you would want to slot into this build, you could do that. It would show up when you actually go to the Grizzly Rage, much like Earthen Bulwark. So this also allows us to Grizzly Rage whenever we want, and then use Bulwark instead of having to Bulwark first. This is another reason this helmet is kind of nice and helps us with this. It kind of opens up that opportunity a little bit. So the next unique we're going to have is again used for its secondaries, but also for its passive, which we're going to get physical and overpower damage. Both of these are going to gain us additional damage, and then we're going to have damage reduction while Fortify. That has good synergy once again with the Earthen Bulwark that we are talking about here. But we're also going to receive total armor in werebear form. Again, we are using werebear form. +2 ranks to all werebear skill, but then werebear is also our true form, so an added nice cosmetic of we will always be able to walk around as the werebear. So if you're wondering, how do I be a bear all of the time? Well, there is the answer to that question. Now, if we move on to the next legendary, once we start getting into the aspects that are weapon, one hand, two hand, gloves, amulet, and ring type of aspects, these ones are quite important. So this is where you want to perk up a little bit and start paying attention, because this is where the build starts to come into play. Now, I actually want to start here with this one, which is going to make Pulverize create a shockwave. So how this ends up working is when I attack with Pulverize, it shoots out this shockwave, and the shockwave does damage. But the thing about that shockwave is it actually scales with additional damage depending upon the row. Now, this is a 260% because it is a perfect row for this, and it is on the two-hander. So if this was on a one-hander, it'd be 130% because the two-handers get that bonus effect, which is why it's on a two-hander. This is also the largest modifier in terms of any of the legendary aspects for Druid. So in terms of just raw percentages, this one is the highest. Now, there might be other ones that contribute more overall damage, but this is the highest percentage modifier of any of them, which is why I have it on a two-hand. Now, when we go back to the gloves, here's where I want to go next. You can see Pulverize, this same ability, is now also a Earth skill. So when we cast it, not only do we leave these earth little spikes on the ground, which is why you've been seeing these earth spikes when I'm using Pulverize, but also any of the abilities that modify it will also modify it because it's an earth skill. So if I have a earth-based modifier For instance, like the boots, when I have Fortify, again, Earth and Bulwark, your Earth skills gain +2 rank. Now, this is an Earth skill, so you can see the +2 rank just fell off right there. It was 13, now it's 11. So I'm gaining additional base damage off of the fact that I can actually be fortified. So that is another way in which this build will work. Now, the legs I have here, I'm not necessarily 100% proud of. I'm using these ones in order to gain a barrier. This could be interchanged. The reason I'm using this is because there's a multiple of other legendaries that will also increase your damage off the barrier. I'm not using them in this build at the moment, but you could have another one of those legendary aspects that will allow you to increase your damage off barrier, so that will give you the opportunity to have some synergy there. But also, having a barrier is somewhat important because you're doing overpower damage, and if you don't know how overpower works with the pulverize, overpower increases its damage based on your current life and fortify. So you want to keep yourself as healthy as possible when attempting to deal damage in order to get your maximum amount of damage off of your overpower. For that reason, having a barrier, for instance, like this here, will increase your healthiness overall and basically make the barrier receive the damage first. So if you get stuck in a pack of mobs, you're not suddenly losing all your DPS. So for that reason, I like the barriers, a little bit of survivability. Again, I'm not super proud of this one. It's not mandatory. Okay. Now, if you actually look at the necklace here, this one is quite important. Doesn't have to be on the necklace, but this is important to have. It increases the duration of Grizzly Rage. Grizzly Rage, once again, is the one that makes us into a dire werebear. The reason we want this is because it is going to not only increase the duration, but every critical strike we get is going to increase our critical damage while in this form by 10%, and this has an infinite stacking cap. So this is actually part of the reason we run Hurricane, because this allows us to get another AoE that's going on constantly getting crits, which is ramping our overall attack damage because we're getting more critical strike damage from that, plus the fact that we're pounding out the pulverize. Okay, so you can start to see where the synergy is coming from. If you have a big group of guys that are really tanky and you're having trouble killing them, the longer you go, actually the more damage you're doing. But then, because if we actually look at the way the abilities work, when we look at the skill tree, Pulverize is also going to stun them when they are overpowered by Pulverize. So any of the abilities that we have here, for instance, if we attack somebody who is slowed, stunned, immobilized, or knocked back, we get increased damage with Earth skills. Don't forget, again, Pulverize is an Earth skill. So as we start to go through this skill tree here in just a moment, which I'll explain fully in a moment, just keep in your mind Pulverize is in fact an Earth skill, as that is going to be very important to fully understand the build. So now as we get into the rings, this one I use primarily because of secondaries, overpower from the werebear, rank of quick shift passive, damage while shapeshifted. It's lots of raw numbers in terms of DPS output. The secondary unique of it, you know, not costing anything to do a werebear after a werewolf skill is actually not used at all for me currently at the moment, but I do like the secondaries. So this ring is not necessarily required, and it's only here for me to stack additional damage. So you could swap this out with another ring, for instance, like your Trample, now doing Landslide Pillars, which is Earth damage, and we over there are going to have Earth bonuses. So there's other options. You can also use anything that maybe you think is going to help you generate more spirit, as we'll talk about spirit generation in just a moment, but that's one such example. So now if you look at the next one, again, important secondaries. This is the one you get just from beating the campaign, so everyone's going to get this, but if core skill hits 5 or more enemies, then you have a percentage of your resource cost is refunded. We're really going to have a spirit problem as a druid, and we're going to solve that in a moment with some skills. But because of this, I like to have things to help me generate spirit. So this is one such ability. Again, both of these rings, much like the legs, are interchangeable with other options. So the mandatory ones are basically the fact that you want to get Pulverize to be an Earth skill. You want Pulverize to have the shockwave. Okay, you want the duration of Grizzly Rage because that's where you're going to ramp it. You kind of want the werebear form, and then you want the secondary stats of things like overpower, damage, critical damage from Earth skills, damage to crowd control the enemies, core skills, overpower. Like any of these types of stats you're seeing, those are all fairly crucial. Okay, but these rings here in this leg, don't worry, don't sweat about those too much. Now let's go ahead and get into the skill tree. I'm going to need to start from the top and walk you through and explain this. We're going to use Maul because, again, we're using the werebear build, so this is the werebear form, and because of that, we're going to have Fortify as well as a chance to knock down. I like that. You can also go with the range radius. Neither of those are required necessarily. You can pick the one you want there. Now, maximum spirit increased by 9. We're going to be taking this so that we have access to the core skill. Again, we are maxing Pulverize. Pulverize is a core skill, so we're going to take all of the damage we can, and this is actually very crucial in terms of our damage output. It's going to make it cost more spirit, but we'll talk about how we solve that in just a moment. Basic skills generate 18% more spirit, so that's going to help us a little bit with that. Obviously, we're going to max pulverize all the way. This is our primary move. We're going to take the enhance, obviously, and we're going to do the enemies are overpowered, are stunned in order to get that fact that they're crowd controlled to get more damage. We're also going to have a slow built into this, but the stun's also nice for survivability. Again, we need to have maximum amount of HP and have high survivability in order for us to do the maximum damage output because of the way that overpower works. So it's that, or they reduce the damage they deal. I think if they're stunned, they're not really doing a lot of damage now, are they? So that's sort of my logic in terms of the damage output by that. Okay. We're also going to take critical strike to close enemies. We're using pulverize. We're right on top of them. It makes sense. We're going to take earthen bulwark for the reasons mentioned. Take the unstoppable. Fortify, again, it's synergy. From here, we're going to be taking the debilitating roar, enhance it for the fortify, and then slow the enemies because, again, if they're slow, they're crowd controlled or anything like that, we deal more damage to them. We're going to skip all of the companion tiers, and we're going to go down here, okay, to the wrath tiers, where we're going to take 1 point in hurricane in order to take the next point to make them slowed, again, for the reasons stated, and vulnerable. Both of these states will help us increase the damage against them, so hurricane gets a lot of value, plus we can run hurricane once again while we're in grizzly form, which will help us ramp more critical damage because of the reasons that we mentioned when it comes back to, don't forget this legendary item right here, the rampaging werebeast. We're getting more and more and more critical ramping damage, so that has very high synergy with that. Okay, we don't have to take trample, but I have 1 point in it. The trample is okay. If you're doing the landslide pillar build, absolutely trample is going to be a staple. Otherwise, if you're doing the pulverized build, it's not 100% required. I do take the werebear form for healing because, again, we want to stay healthy, but mostly because I want the every 20 seconds we get a guaranteed overpower with our pulverize or with any skill, and primarily we're going to be using overpower on the pulverize, which is where most of our damage is going to be coming. So the ways that we can get overpower as much as possible will help our overall damage output. So we're going to take crushing earth because of the increased damage to slow, immobilized, or knocked enemies. We're going to take critical strikes with earth skills, fortify you for a percentage of the life. And then when we have a certain amount of fortify, we do more damage, which again with the earth skill. So this is why we want to have so much fortify, maximum life, and be tanky, because we're dealing even more damage. As we come down here to the next ultimate tier, we're going to take Defiance in order to deal more damage with nature magic skills. If you look at Pulverize, it's earth and nature magic. So again, we're going to get that to elite minions. We're going to take Quick Shift, which will give us more damage while shapeshifted. Obviously, we're Werebear. We're going to go ahead and eat that damage up. We're going to take Grizzly Rage all of the way to be unstoppable, as well as generate Fortify. And then this is the tricky part at the end. We're actually going to take Earthen Might. That way we have a 5% chance to restore all our spirit when we hit somebody with an earth skill. And when we're smacking people in AoE, when we get that opportunity to regenerate that earth skill, that means we get a few more smacks. And what we really, really need is to be able to have that ramping damage of overpower in the critical strike, and also guarantees our critical strikes for 5 seconds. If you go the Spirit Boon, every 10th kill, we guarantee our next earth skill is an overpower, so we can take that as well. Now, there's another opportunity to swap that for nature magic to reduce the cooldown of your ultimate when you're using Pulverize, basically. That's a viable strategy as well, but only if you have another way to really deal with the fact of like that you need a lot of spirit. I take the overpower just because for more damage, I am currently lacking lots of spirit, so I feel like if I had non-stop spirit, then I would be more inclined to take this ability. Now, I do take dealing damage as a chance to restore spirit. You don't have to just take that one. You can also take the extended duration of ultimate. So if you're taking the one that reduces the cooldown of ultimate, you probably also want to take the extended duration of the ultimate, which in a way is sort of its own cooldown reduction. So for that reason, you can actually get the ultimate up quite often and constantly have that ramping damage, which is very strong. I take critical strike as well as critical hit damage. You can also take maximum life, which will increase damage as well if you're feeling like you don't need the critical strike because of Earthen Might, for instance, where you can constantly get the guaranteed crits if you feel like that way. Feel free to take the life instead, and then I gain maximum spirit. That way, when I fully max out on my spirit from the Earthen Might, I get a higher amount of spirit. So that's effectively the build when it goes to legendary aspects and to skills. But here's the thing. Even at level 50, if you got all of the things I say completed, you're still going to feel a little bit lackluster. And when you go and do your fights, you're going to feel like, hey, I'm not really slapping the way I want. Okay, so maybe you pull up on some minions and you feel like, you know, I'm doing some damage, but I'm not really, you know, one-shotting everything, or I'm feeling lackluster. That's because of one reason, which is that you need your Paragon board. You really need the Paragon board for this to start popping off. Why am I saying that? Because at later levels, the Paragon board gets very good for the Werebear. If you look at this, when you start into the Paragon board, you're going to get 20% damage right off the rip. You can also go for maximum life. I'm going the damage route. Okay, so I got 20% damage there. I got the glyph socket for the werebear, and I've been leveling this through nightmare sigils, which gives us 44% damage while we're in werebear form. And we also get on the left side of this 20% damage and 11% damage while in werebear form. So you can see where we're getting all of these up here. Then we go to the next werebear, basically Paragon tree, which is the legendary node that gives us damage based upon our current life percentage, which is again why we want to be healthy. This one gives us, look at that, 60% overpower damage, 10% werebear skill. Okay, so a lot of these boards, 20% damage while on werebear. Look at that. Okay, overpower damage from all enemies, 68% overpower damage. Okay, 50% damage done to healthy enemies. And then I was going to go up here and start taking inner beast for spirit cost reduction, because now I'm like, I feel like my damage is good enough, I need spirit. But the boards are very strong for werebear when you actually take like the overpower board and you go for that werebear survival instincts board. When you go for that one, there's a lot of very strong werebear Paragon points. So your damage starts to ramp once you get past 50 and start getting those Paragon points. So when you get the renown, it's going to be very important if you're a druid to get this renown early, because your Paragon points are going to skyrocket your damage very, very soon. Two more things to keep in mind when it comes to damage output. Number one is, like I've been saying throughout this whole thing, if you are low HP, you will not do as much damage. So if you want to do higher damage, you need to have your fortify all the way up. See, it's only 159. You need to have your life all the way up. You need to make sure that you are surviving and that you can damage output while having full HP. If you are low HP, you're going to do significantly less damage. So if you go from like, I just hit 100,000 to I hit 2,000 and you're wondering why, that's part of the reason. The other part is that you need to understand Pulverize has a built-in shockwave mechanic from this legendary aspect that has a double hitbox that people don't realize. So effectively, if you're going to use this Pulverize ability and I pulverize directly on top of you like that, you're going to be hit by my circle of Pulverize like a standard Pulverize. But if I stand a little bit farther away from you, about the range of this person's circle, and attack, you actually get hit twice. You get hit by both the circle of the Pulverize, but you also get hit by the shockwave. They are separate, and there is an overlap. So the circle is about this big, and the square goes in about halfway of the circle like that in front of the druid. So there is this sweet spot right in front where you can double tap basically with the Pulverize. Now you'll be able to do, instead of 260%, effectively 360%, because you're going to do your normal Pulverize damage, then you're also going to hit them with the shockwave that does the 260% damage. So it's a very large difference in terms of DPS output, and it's not something you're acutely aware of if you're one-shotting all the mobs. If you're just farming stuff super easy like this, you're not really going to notice that you got the double hit until you go something that's tanky enough to survive your hits, where you can get the double tap and then you happen to hit them right in that sweet spot in the center. So you want to start understanding the ranges and start understanding exactly how this shockwave Pulverize works, and just pay attention to it. You'll notice it if you start looking at it. Try to hit them just a little bit in front of you when you start using the Pulverize. That's effectively how this build works. It has been very effective for me. I'm able to push through more or less anything at this point that's within my range. The only thing I can't really do is like push very, very, very hard on the nightmare sigils, for instance. But I think you should try this build out. I'm sure there's some weak points that maybe I didn't get exactly perfect, but if you find them out, please leave them a comment so that our Druid community can get better at the game together. Love you all. Subscribe, please, and I'll see you on the next video.